Hi everyone, I'm really excited to interview Auryn Macmillan, co-founder of Gnosis Guild. I have been following Auryn's work on Twitter. I have listened to his podcast, and it's so much insightful. If you're in the DAO community in the crypto space, to know Auryn's thoughts, so I thought it would be a great a useful and lesson for us in the architecture tech community to invite Orin and know his thoughts in the space. So thanks a lot, Orin, for your time to do this.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me. Excited for the discussion.
So, Orin, like before we go deep dive into the DAO space, can you uh, share what was your eureka or aha moment in this space?
I don't know. I feel like I've had a lot of them recurring over the last kind of few years, or the last almost I don't know, coming up on a decade now. The one that kind of first got me tumbling down the rabbit hole was, I guess, back in 2013. I was actually playing basketball professionally at the time, and so in a totally different industry, totally different field, nothing at all related to cryptocurrency, and then saw a news broadcast talking about the deep web, the dark web. And so that kind of piqued my interest right away. And I started poking around with the Tor browser on a whole bunch of .onion websites and found my way to several different marketplaces. And everything was denominated in this weird BTC, Bitcoin thing. And so I kind of just started diving and trying to figure out what that was, why people were using it in that context, and kind of what it was worth. If something was listed as 10 BTC, then how much that actually kind of represented in Australian dollars at the time. And so that was kind of my entry point. And then shortly after that, I stumbled onto some of Vitalik's early writings about Ethereum, and kind of what he envisioned it to be. And what really piqued my interest then was the concept of DAOs. And I think that's what really kind of turned it from a casual interest into kind of a just decade-long obsession.
I see. That's quite interesting. And I wanted to know your thoughts on like what makes like DAO special for this era. Like, so there were like online social communities. There are also local communities before with financial incentives. So what makes it different this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole handful of different qualities of DAOs that make them different for different use cases and for different groups of people. The things that really excite me about it are, one, just the essentially baked in values of kind of decentralization and not having to rely on middlemen or on kind of jurisdictions to kind of enforce the agreed upon rules about how we interact in a given context. So being able to create some context and some kind of shared set of rules that are kind of self-enforcing, or that are enforcing because of the substrate that we kind of launch them on, because we kind of create this organization within the context of, say, Ethereum, then those rules are able to be kind of enforced by the kind of the language and the constraints of that ecosystem, of that execution environment. So that is one of the really big draw cards from my point of view. And then one of the kind of neat, I guess, kind of second order effects of that is that it works really well then in the context of kind of cross-jurisdictional collaborations or organizations. It's trivial to spin up an organization between people in different kind of continents, different countries, different jurisdictions, with a kind of agreed upon set of rules in a way that's just not in the kind of legacy world. If you want to create some kind of legacy legal construct, then you need to choose a jurisdiction, and you need to ensure that the people participating have some kind of legal personhood within that jurisdiction, which can be really, really difficult for a lot of people in many parts of the world. This has not been something that I've experienced firsthand. I grew up in Australia and I live in the US now, and so both of those countries have relatively stable governments, relatively stable legal systems, where I can create an LLC or something like that gives me a relatively stable organizational entity. But for a lot of people in a lot of parts of the world, they maybe don't have access to uh, a stable government, a stable legal system, and kind of legal entities that they can trust to still exist or still be the same or function how they're intended to, a year from now or 5 years from now and 10 years from now, in the same way that I potentially can in Australia or in the US. And so I think that property of it is really, really powerful. Essentially, giving access to or enabling a whole kind of essentially cohort or kind of a massive population of people access to organizational tooling that they can't get natively, or they may struggle to get access to natively within the kind of jurisdictions that they live physically.
I see. And building upon that, for example, I have heard that people can register DAO as LLC in Wyoming or Estonia. Like, so if something goes wrong, like, are there like core group of members liable, or the whole people who were part of the DAO are liable for that?
Yeah, I think that really depends on what route you take to legal kind of personification, or if you take that route at all. I guess I'm always wary around this topic because it can quickly get into kind of like legal advice territory, and I'm most certainly not a lawyer, so no one take any of this as legal advice. But yeah, there's a few, I don't know, broad approaches that I've seen people take in practice. One is to completely ignore any of it and just go out and do your thing. I wouldn't recommend that as the right way to do things, but there's definitely a lot of people that do, that just say, screw it, what's on chain is what we care about, and we're not going to worry about dealing with legacy kind of legal structures. Others are other ways that I've seen people do it, or projects or DAOs do it, is to explicitly set up kind of agreements between participants in the DAO. So not go and seek any formal legal personhood anywhere, or legal kind of recognition anywhere, but to set up essentially make the group essentially some kind of unincorporated entity kind of by default, by just saying, by default in most jurisdictions, you would be something equivalent to like a general partnership. But I guess, what I've seen some DAOs do is then set up an explicit kind of participant agreement that, you as someone who is participating in this DAO agree to, and that kind of sets ground rules on how you interact with the other people in a legal context, and essentially says things along the lines of, I'm not going to sue the other people in the organization, and we're not going to do stuff that's illegal in various jurisdictions. And if there is a dispute, then we'll all agree to go through some arbitration channel rather than take it to a more traditional court. And then the third and kind of increasingly popular route is to try to find some kind of legal wrapper or kind of legal touch point. And there's been a few different ways that people have done that. One has been with things like a foundation set up in some jurisdiction that kind of acts on behalf of this illegal kind of nebulous DAO thing. And usually in some part of its operating agreement would be, that it has to act in the will of or in the best interest of this kind of DAO. And then another way that I've seen this been done more and more frequently is by actually setting up kind of legal wrappers. And so that's where the Wyoming DAO legislation, or the Vermont blockchain based LLCs, or some upcoming legislation in Colorado, where those things kind of come in handy, is that there's come into play where there's the ability to actually set up some kind of legal entity that wraps or represents the DAO. There is these kind of DAO specific legislations, but also it's worth pointing out that just like LLCs as a legal entity are incredibly flexible. And so even before those were created, there's several examples of DAOs going and creating kind of legal wrappers just out of a kind of bespoke LLC, as opposed to using any specific or any kind of DAO specific legislation.
I see. That's quite insightful. And I'm curious to know, like, from your experience, like, can you walk us through like step-by-step procedure on like starting a DAO, finding like a sustainable way to approach it, building community? Like, what are some core ingredients which makes a DAO successful?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think probably really hard to give generalized answers to, because it really is very dependent on what the DAO is trying to do. What its activities are, what its purpose is. So I mean, like if you're looking for like really high level things to steps, I mean, maybe the first one is just actually arriving at some kind of a purpose and objective. But like taking a step back, I generally think there's two kind of really broad categories of DAOs that I think about. One is essentially protocol DAOs, where you have a really tightly scoped function that you're decentralizing. And so that would be things like the Bitcoin network or the Ethereum network. These are DAOs where participation in the DAO is effectively running the mining client. You have all kinds of other types of participation in there, but in terms of participating in the DAO's kind of core function and mining or validating is essentially like your participation there. And so this is what I would kind of broadly lump into one category of DAOs, is these kind of protocols style DAOs. We have this really tightly scoped, really narrow way of participating. And because of that, you're able to have participation in a lot of cases be very permissionless. Anyone can come and turn on a Bitcoin miner and start participating in that network. Anyone can turn on an ETH hash miner and start mining Ethereum, or go and deposit Ether into the validator queue and spin up a validator. So yeah, you're able to kind of set up very, very fluid and kind of liquid entry and exit. The other kind of broad way that I kind of lump other DAOs together is these kind of more less tightly scoped DAOs that typically have some broader range of things that they might try to do, and these are the ones that you would typically deploy onto a network like Ethereum, and could have any number of different applications or different things that they want to do, from collectively owning or collecting a bunch of artwork and NFTs, to running a DeFi protocol, to allocating funds to like grant funds to different projects, to making investments, to to anything else that a business might do in the kind of traditional world. And I think like the reason I say it might be hard to come up with a concrete set of steps that you would take to spin up a DAO is just because there's so much potential variation there. If I was to say like what are the concrete steps that you would take to starting, I don't know, a business, like there may be a handful of concrete steps that you'd say, like if you want to go and create a file for your legal entity and create an EIN and stuff like that, you can say like these are concrete steps. But in terms of the actual like business plan and who you get involved at which point and when, it really is like super dependent on what the DAO is trying to do and what they kind of, I don't know, what you assess as the best pathways to making those things happen.
I see. Yeah, like it's very broad in that sense, but like I was like inclining more towards like knowing, like for example, if I were to start like from my observation, like people start with a Discord server with a vision and a purpose, and then like if based on the project, you might require like different guilds to build upon the community, find tasks, reward them, do like voting. So like what are different stages involved, or what are new roles involved, which one should be aware of and prepare?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess part of what I've been working on with Gnosis Guild is trying to enable really smooth kind of incremental steps in kind of a progressive decentralization journey. And so I'd say that probably the starting point for most DAOs would be pretty similar to the starting point for most traditional organizations. You have a handful of people, a small group of people that come together and have a shared vision on something that they want to create. And so, at that point, control is probably entirely within their hands. And where a DAO would diverge from a more traditional organization would be the point where it recognizes that there is value in ceding control, ceding some measure of control over to the community, the kind of network of people that are also adding value to this organization. And so I'd say, yeah, I mean, a pattern that seems to be quite popular at the moment is kind of, like you said, having a group of people that starts something like a Discord server, a shared space. It might be a Discord server, like a discourse forum, or maybe a subreddit or something like that. And then kind of building up some traction around an idea, and then ultimately kind of deploying a DAO contract and distributing control to the members of that community in some way.
Got it. And uh, is like for DAO, the decentralization part stands for the community, and autonomous part stands for like based on the voting, like certain decisions either in smart contract or other are decided. So like no one can change those. Like what's if you can elaborate on those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point. Probably for a lot of people listening, maybe DAO is a new term. So, yeah, just to disambiguate there, DAO is DAO, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And there's a fair bit of debate for all three of the words in the acronym. Starting with the last one, a lot of people would argue that most DAOs are not very organized, so the word organization doesn't really fit. But yeah, decentralized would typically, I don't know, be reflected on a few different levels. One is obviously this kind of substrate that they're deployed to. So having the operating code live inside of a decentralized execution environment like Ethereum, I think is a big part to a DAO actually being a DAO. You could set up all of the same rules in legal contracts, but it does not have the same kind of it doesn't have the same kind of decentralized feel to it, because those contracts can be are enforced in a much less decentralized way. The other part to the kind of decentralized piece here is obviously how control of the organization is distributed. So obviously the more people and the kind of more varied people and the more kind of equally the power is kind of distributed among those people, then probably the more decentralized you would say it is. And there's DAOs with varying degrees of that, varying kind of Gini coefficients and varying degrees of kind of trust distribution and power distribution, and lots of varying kind of decision-making mechanisms. So it's a kind of wide open design space. The autonomous piece would again refer to kind of multiple layers there. One is obviously where it's kind of deployed to. If it's deployed somewhere where it can easily be essentially shut off, then it's probably not autonomous. But then also it refers to the way that the organization and then the way that the people interacting with the organization can go about doing it. So and so there's a lot of confusion about conflation of automatic with autonomous when people are talking about DAOs. And so I think a real key kind of piece to understand there is that this doesn't necessarily mean that everything happens kind of automatically, but it does refer to the fact that people should be able to interact with the organization autonomously. Like they should be able to without needing to use some mediator, some kind of other service or some other person or intermediary. They should be able to kind of interact directly with the organization, with the organization's logic. So a big one way that this has been described often as you have this kind of automation layer of it is kind of the code at the center of the organization, and then you have these autonomous agents at the edges, people, communities, whatever it is, at the edges that are kind of interacting with this relatively automated center of the organization.
I see. There is one question from the live chat. Like, have you, how about creating decentralized autonomous cities? Any examples on or thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a kind of concept that a lot of people have been throwing around for quite a while. There is a project at the moment called City DAO, I believe, that's aiming to do something kind of similar to this, like wanting to essentially create charter cities or create a charter city that runs as a DAO. There's a little town up in uh, Minnesota that is also exploring this as an idea, kind of essentially turning their town into a DAO. But it's definitely not something that exists out in the wild to any great extent yet. It's something I think a lot of people have thrown around the idea on paper, but none have yet kind of made the leap into the real world that I'm aware of.
Yeah. And I was wondering, is there any like a score of DAO-ness? Like, so there are a lot of DAOs currently being developed, and some are more centralized, some are like extremely decentralized. And so, how do you evaluate a DAO? And are there any red signals before joining a community you see, and okay, I'm not gonna continue in this DAO?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of any kind of standardized way to score DAOs, but some, I guess, like red flags that I would look out for. Um, uh, Kind of, I don't know. It depends a little bit on the life cycle of the DAO, but there are quite a few DAOs that um, essentially projects that kind of communicate themselves as DAOs, but give no kind of tangible control of the organization over to the members of the organization. And so, I think that is okay in the early stages of a DAO. But it should be kind of part of a progressive decentralization journey. Like they should be legitimately aspiring uh, to hand over control or to kind of give some measure of direct autonomous control to the participants in the organization. And so I think that the red flag there is just organizations that kind of talk the talk, but never actually cross the threshold to enabling their community to tangibly own and control the organization. Um, Outside of that, I mean, there's specific kind of red flags to look out for, I guess, like on the contract level and stuff like that. Just like anywhere where there's addresses that have specific admin permissions that drain a treasury or can halt things, can essentially stop things from functioning as intended, or can run away with funding that's been committed or anything like that, are definitely red flags that people should watch out for when they're thinking about joining a DAO. And conversely, there's quite a few DAO frameworks that have been built specifically to kind of combat those types of issues. Moloch is a really great example of this, where the entire kind of design of it is really predicated around the idea of being able to trustlessly join the organization and know that you can kind of leave with your share of the assets at any point in time. Moloch, or the creators of Moloch kind of created this function in it called rage quit, which is essentially you burn your shares in the organization and you take your share of the treasury. And so like that function existing in Moloch DAOs allows you to kind of participate comfortably, knowing that you can always leave if the DAO starts to do things that you disagree with. And so like looking for mechanisms that offer kind of protections like this, I think is another really great way to kind of filter for DAOs that you might be comfortable joining.
I see. And before we do like a deep dive on Gnosis Safe and Zodiac, like what are some tools which you recommend people who are gonna start a DAO like should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different DAO tooling out there, different DAO frameworks. So, I mean, I can just list off a handful of them that are out there and I've played with in the past. Aragon is one. Colony is one. There's the Compound / OpenZeppelin governance framework. there's Dow Stack, there's Moloch/Dow House, there's Snapshot, and the Gnosis Safe, and obviously the Zodiac tools that we've been building. And then there's a handful of other frameworks that are kind of up and coming that are worth checking out as well. One that I'm really excited about is called Orca Protocol. So yeah, each one of those frameworks kind of has different different pros and cons, different kind of flavors to it in terms of how people participate in governance and what governance looks like and what kind of functionality the organization has. But yeah, they're all really great tools and definitely worth having a look at.
I see. Thanks for the list. And can you give us an overview why one should use Gnosis Safe and Zodiac?
Yeah, so I guess maybe a bit of a backstory is good here, just to help understand kind of why Zodiac exists. Essentially, in late 2020, we at Gnosis were looking at creating the Gnosis DAO, transferring a huge chunk of Gnosis's treasury into a DAO for the community to control. And we just, after doing kind of a wholesale review of all of the DAO tooling, realized none of it checked all of the boxes that we wanted to check. And in particular, there was kind of 3 points. One was that we wanted it to go somewhere that was really proven to secure a lot of money. We were transferring several hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, and so we wanted to make sure it was going somewhere safe. Another kind of point that we really wanted to check off was to not price people out of participation. On-chain voting on the Ethereum mainnet had gotten really expensive, and so we were really hesitant to go and adopt a framework that was going to force people to either spend a lot to vote or force people to kind of delegate their vote to someone else and kind of lose the opportunity to participate directly in governance. And then the third was that we didn't want to make a choice that was going to kind of unreasonably restrict our future design decisions for the DAO or the DAO's future design decisions for itself. So what we ended up kind of landing on was leaning into a pattern that we had seen emerging in the DAO space already, which was a combination of this tool Snapshot with our tool, the Gnosis Safe. So the Gnosis Safe, for anyone who's not familiar, is a multi-sig wallet. Essentially, it lets you create a contract account where you can set up some number of signers, kind of co-signers on this wallet, and you need to have a threshold of those signers in order to trigger the wallet to do anything. So it was kind of built as a multi-sig, and that's primarily how it's been kind of advertised to the world and how most people know it. What most people didn't realize was that under the hood, it was this kind of just really powerful programmable account standard. And it has this neat interface for adding modules that kind of extend the logic of the Gnosis Safe. And so what we realized here is that we could create a module that would essentially, using an oracle, import the results of this off-chain voting on Snapshot, this kind of signaling tool, use an oracle to bring those results on-chain and then trigger execution in a Gnosis Safe. And so we could essentially create this progressive decentralization where we started with a Gnosis Safe multi-sig, then added a snapshot instance as a signaling mechanism, then added this module to give the snapshot instance kind of direct autonomous control over the safe. And then we might restrict what the multi-sig owners can do. Maybe we'll restrict them to only being able to veto transactions coming in as opposed to having kind of unilateral control over the whole safe. So then they act as more of kind of a safety measure, as a backstop, as opposed to a kind of parallel control mechanism. And then maybe a last step is just to remove them altogether. And so in doing this, we kind of created this really nice progressive decentralization journey for the Gnosis DAO and realized that this was something that we could kind of generalize. This was a pattern that we could generalize to all kinds of DAO tools, which would enable a whole host of benefits. By essentially decoupling the account, the avatar of the DAO from the mechanism that controls it, we get these huge array of benefits. So one is these kind of progressive decentralization journeys like that. Another is the kind of migration. It drastically lowers the friction of migrating from one framework to another. And so like a good example that I've used for this in the past is, say you're new to the DAO space, you and a group of friends spin up a DAO using the Aragon framework. And then 6 months in, now you're kind of Web3 native, and you realize, oh, hey, I really wish we had have done this as a Moloch DAO instead. This would have worked way better for us for X, Y, and Z reasons. We're going to go ahead and migrate. And so because you spun it up as an Aragon DAO, you now have to move all of your tokens that your DAO controls from your old Aragon DAO to your new Moloch DAO. You have to move all of the systems that Aragon DAO controls. You have to kind of update those settings, move it over to the Moloch DAO now controlling it, and you have to update any external references to the Aragon DAO's address over to your Moloch DAO. And so this is a whole bunch of separate proposals and kind of coordination around this migration. It's this kind of monumental migration effort. Whereas if you were to kind of decouple the account and control, if kind of when you spin up your DAO, you start with a Gnosis safe and then you plug in the Aragon DAO as the thing that controls it, then when you want to migrate from Aragon being your governance mechanism, your control mechanism, to Moloch being your governance mechanism, your control mechanism, it's one proposal with the Aragon DAO to add the Moloch DAO as a module and remove the Aragon DAO as a module. And kind of just with that one kind of decoupling, you now make that migration process much, much easier, which means that it's much easier then to just update and change and kind of mix and match lots of different mechanisms to create an organization that's kind of a composite of many different things, as opposed to being locked into one specific pathway for the organization to grow. And then the last thing that it's kind of somewhat uniquely enables there is for kind of cross-chain or cross-layer organizations to exist, where you can essentially have an organization deployed on one network. You pick a network like, say, Gnosis Chain as the execution environment where the DAO itself is deployed, but then you could have assets that you control on mainnet and on Arbitrum and Optimism and Polygon and Avalanche and wherever else the safe is deployed. You now have a kind of route to going and controlling those. That would be via the bridge module that your mouse cursors are over right now. So yeah, these kind of things are the reasons that we decided to create Zodiac as a framework and kind of build on top of the Gnosis safe. And I guess maybe just by way of context, so Zodiac is this kind of standard for and a collection of tools for composable, interoperable DAO tooling. And essentially what it does is, just encourages this pattern of decoupling your account from your control mechanism. And it treats all of the existing DAO frameworks essentially as modules to an avatar, to a Gnosis safe, as well as having a handful of additional modules that you can use as kind of bits and pieces to kind of construct your own DAO in whatever way makes sense.
This is such an interesting and challenging engineering problem you guys have solved, of bridging it, the interoperability, and I foresee it's gonna be so much useful in future, because new blockchains coming up, people are having preference towards one or the other blockchain. It's gonna be so much useful. So thanks a lot.
Right.
So you know I wanted to do a rapid fire round with you before we wrap up the interview. So first, you will have 5 to 10 seconds to answer the question, and I'm gonna keep it brief. So, which city is in your travel bucket list?
Ooh, I really want to go to Tokyo. I went to Osaka for DevCon and really loved it, so I want to get back to Japan.
Your favorite DAO?
I don't know, the Gnosis DAO right now.
Any technical or business book which made a big impact?
Principles by Ray Dalio.
And any Twitter handle you really admire on in the blockchain or Web3 space?
Kia, who you have on screen right now, she's my co-founder at Gnosis Guild. I have a ton of respect for her. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to work closely with her and her kind of insights into all things kind of blockchain and beyond.
Yeah. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently in your DAO journey or Web3 journey?
I wish I would have learned to write Solidity sooner. I played for a long time in the Web3 space and didn't bother to learn. And when I did, it opened all kinds of doors. And so I would recommend anyone that's getting into it, even if you've never done any coding at all before, just pick it up and start learning it. It's a fantastic tool set, fantastic skill.
Yeah. What's your speculation for DAOs in 2030?
There'll be lots more of them. And they'll I think they will essentially like blow the top and the bottom off of the way that or where organizations scale. You know, like they make it much easier to make something really small for you to kind of spin up and create something with a group of friends, and they in theory should be able to scale much larger than traditional organizations. So we'll see some DAOs like the Bitcoin network and the Ethereum network well and truly eclipse the scale that any traditional firms have been able to reach.
Yeah. And your piece of advice to 20 or 30-year-olds who are getting started in the Web3 space?
Learn Solidity. And I think the other thing is like find a project or a mission that you're really aligned with, that you're really passionate about, and just go and find a way to contribute to it. So a lot of people kind of ask, you know, how do you get involved with Web3? How do you kind of break into it? And the pattern that's worked consistently for me and for a whole lot of people that I know is essentially to go and find a project that you really like, that you're really passionate about, and start just contributing value to it. Don't go in there expecting kind of a return up front. Contribute value to it, and this space tends to disproportionately reward the people that jump in early and just show initiative.
Yeah, I know we have only 2 minutes left, so my final question is, what has been the most challenging aspect in terms of technical for developing Zodiac?
I don't think that it's been a hugely technical challenge so far. I think the biggest challenge is reprogramming how people think about building DAOs, encouraging people to kind of adopt this new model of decoupling their account from their control mechanism. And then I think just the social challenge more broadly of helping people to understand why DAOs are interesting and useful, and what context they're useful compared to kind of their traditional counterparts.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Auryn, for your time to share your work and thoughts. And I wish all luck for Zodiac. It's an amazing development, and I totally support this.
Cheers. Thanks so much for having me. This was a really great chat.
Yeah. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Cheers. You as well.